Hey guys, so I've been asked before if I could compare the difference between one of these recalled PSC motors and today's Weather Shield PSC motor. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to show you the difference for whoever asked, and I'm going to show you there's a pretty big difference in the motors. Okay, so I have the motors unscrewed, so I'm just going to go ahead and take casings off. I don't know if you can see this. You should be able to see this. This one is stiff. Uh-oh. All right. So, as you can see, they are highly different. These motors are highly different. See if I can rotate this. Completely different. This has what is known as the inner core stator windings, and this has just the traditional style windings. Yep. Here's the capacitor on the newer one. It is a 6 microfarad capacitor made in 2022. This one, the capacitor is actually kind of busted, as you can see. Capacitor is busted. It was like that from shipping, I think. How do I rotate this without breaking it? This one has a 5 microfarad capacitor. So they're actually closer than I thought they were. Surprisingly, the stators are way different. This one has a pretty thick stator. It's nice and thick. This one has a surprisingly thin stator. That's surprising. I thought it'd be a lot thicker than that. But despite this one having a thicker stator, this one appears to have way more copper. I mean, look at how much copper is right there. It's a lot of copper. All right, so pulling the rotors out, this one's got a nice thick rotor. It is a smaller rotor than I expected. This one's got a really tiny rotor. That's pretty small. The inside of this one looks pretty good. This one, it's all right. I did lubricate this motor right here, and obviously this one too. This motor draws, I think, 0.96 amps last time I checked. Like 0.96 amps at 110 watts. This one pulls 1.1, 1.2 amps, depending on when it's cold or if it's hot, at about 135 to 140 watts. So this one is very powerful. All right, so I'm gonna flip them around so you can look at the back. This one, the stator, the windings don't really touch anything, so I could just set it down like this. This one right here, I don't want to smash the windings or anything, so I'm actually going to have to. That's the thing about working with these older motors is the windings are on the outside. It's pretty easy to damage the windings, but you do get more power, more powerful motor. I accidentally closed out, but the back of this motor is mostly plastic. I mean, a lot of it is just the plastic wiring or the plastic insulation, whatever you call it. This one, a good chunk of this motor is copper. I mean, look at that. There's a little bit of dust right there, but most of this motor is copper compared to this. I think this motor's got way more material in it. This is all pretty tight too. This is tight as well. I mean, that's not, but this is pretty tight for the most part. But this is very tight. Like, I can't move any of this. This is all nice and tight. Okay, so I did bring another motor to compare with this one. This is the motor from my 2005 to 6 3733. And I feel like this motor is kind of like this motor. It just has a weaker capacitor. So we'll see if it has similar copper in the windings. Oh, wow, did not mean for that to happen. Okay, so has the same small rotor. So they look the same to me, honestly. They look to have the same amount of copper or a similar amount of copper. I mean, I can't tell the difference at all. Maybe this one has a little bit less copper. Yeah, it's got a little bit less, but yeah, it's a little bit less, but it's not that much less. Yeah, this one has a 4 microfarad capacitor. This one has a 5. So it's got a weaker capacitor and a little bit less copper, but it still is a very good motor. It pulls a lot more power than the ones today. It's got a lot more copper. This one is a lot shinier because it's a brand new motor. This one came out of that box fan that was new in the box, shockingly. This one's been used a lot more, so the windings are a little bit less vibrant. In the back, they look nearly identical. They look nearly identical. I really do think these are the same motors, just made a few years apart from each other. So I don't know if this one was under the recall or not. I have no idea. I know this one for sure was, but I don't know if this one was or not. I have no idea. It probably was, honestly. I don't know. And looking at the stators, there is a small difference in the stators. Um, the 1.1 amp version has a little bit of a bigger stator, which is to be expected. So I think this one has a bigger rotor too, because it's got a thicker stator. But that's interesting. They're basically identical, probably just made a year or two apart from each other. And here's the last motor I want to compare with these motors. So this is basically just, I guess, the newer version of this motor. So let's see. It wants to be, right, it should slide off now. It's covered in oil. It's crazy. All right, so, okay, there's actually a much bigger difference than I thought. I thought these were the same motors. And there's oil all over the place. Wow. Yeah, the windings are similar style, but they're arranged way differently. It's like, you see how the windings are here compared to how they are here? Yeah, the windings are way different. This one does pull more power. This one pulls 0.92 amps. This one pulls 0.8 amps on the dot. And they both have 4 microfarad capacitor. Yeah. So this has a pretty small rotor. It's got a pretty small rotor. This one has a much bigger rotor. Yeah. Here's the inside of it. I mean, I think this one looks a little bit cheaper than this one, but I don't know. But yeah, this motor appears to have way more copper in it than this one does. Not entirely sure, but this one seems to have way more copper. Yeah, this motor has way more copper in it, or at least it appears that way, than this one does. Yeah, but despite having a much higher power draw, they seem to spin at similar RPM, if not the same RPM. So maybe this motor is more efficient with its power, I don't know. So yeah, I just decided to open the motors up and give them a comparison, give a look at the motors real quick, just because, when is the next time I'm gonna open fan motors? Probably not for a while. And I know a few people asked to see like the differences in the motors because it's very interesting. Like these motors, they look similar to each other. They seem like they perform the same, but they're completely different. Maybe not completely different, but there's a difference in these motors, and many people kind of overlook it. They just say it's a cheap fan motor, but there are differences, and when you put them next to each other, you can see the differences in the motors. But yeah,